especially when it's on the server. And many of you maybe have never actually executed a single line. About a month ago, I did it for the first time. I heard about it, and been thinking about it, and talking about it. For the first time, I sat down and said, okay, I have server XYZ, runs a traditional stack, a LAMP stack, a PHP and Apache. How would I execute a for loop in JavaScript if I wanted to? And there's a couple of different options that we're going to go through. Node.js being one of the most popular, it gets a lot of press on the blogs. Node.js is a wrapper, an environment around the V8 engine. The V8 engine is what Google put into the Chrome browser. Their V8 engine is pretty much able to run on every platform. I have seen a few random reports of people having trouble on some legacy systems. I was able to install it in like 5 minutes on my Linux system. You download it. It has a few dependencies like some Python stuff, but that's only for the build process. You can uninstall those right away because it literally is a standalone library. Something interesting to know about these JavaScript engines, though, is that they're not executable. That's why we need an environment like Node.js wrapped around it. V8 is just a shared library. You can't do anything with it, and that was actually what took most of my time, was I was looking at it and saying, well, I want to execute some code, but all I've got is this .so file. What do I do with that? And so, not being a full-on system administrator myself, I had to do a little bit of research and realized, oh, I need to wrap an executable environment around it. Narwhal is wrapped around Rhino. Rhino is more a Java-based solution to the JavaScript engine. For those of you who don't know, Java and JavaScript have nothing to do with each other. You'd be surprised. Like I said, I help run that Austin JavaScript meetup. You'd be surprised how many times we hear people that are confused by that. It's an unfortunate naming overlap. Narwhal's got a lot of great things. One thing to note about Node.js is it's kind of a rethinking of the way web request processing happens. Because it's entirely JavaScript-based, or almost entirely JavaScript-based, they basically went with one of the biggest strengths of JavaScript, which is that it's an asynchronous capable language. It's a functional language, and you can event things. So when I said earlier that you could replace your web server with Node.js, on their homepage, they have a little 15 or 20 line snippet that quite literally replaces your web server with 20 lines of JavaScript, running on top of Node.js, of course. The way that it is able to do so, and the way it's able to do so so much more efficiently than others, is that it runs in this asynchronous invented model. Instead of firing off a thread and a process for every request, it just has one, and he runs back and forth and services the request as quickly as he can. Orders of magnitude more performance out of it, but it really has an entirely different way that you approach, because right now you're probably used to working with one request comes in, I synchronously process it, I run a database request, and I synchronously return the result. And that's not at all how Node.js works. In fact, it's really difficult to make synchronous code in Node.js, surprisingly so. Narwhal is more synchronous. There's several other JavaScript engines, JavaScript Core, SpiderMonkey, and a dozen others that I don't have time to talk about. But basically the key is whatever environment you're running in, you can go and find a JavaScript engine, and you can probably find a wrapper environment around it that you can download and install probably within about 10 minutes. It's really not that hard. CommonJS. I can't talk about server-side JavaScript without mentioning what CommonJS is. This is a group of people that, and it's gone by other names like Server.js for a while, but it's a group of people that got together and said, okay, JavaScript on the server is a reality. It's happening, but we don't really have very formalized ways to deal with the server from the JavaScript layer. For instance, there's things like, how do I read and write files? How do I do system I/O? How do I execute processes? Or how do I fire off network requests? These are kind of like the DOM of the server, if you will. This is the stuff that JavaScript doesn't have when it's in a browser and doesn't even make sense. But when it's running on a server, it's absolutely critical that JavaScript be able to do these things. And it's kind of the wild, wild west of who knows, based upon you choose Node.js or Narwhal or somebody else, and they're going to be doing those things entirely differently. So CommonJS was an attempt to discuss and propose a set of standards for these things for servers in JavaScript. And the idea behind CommonJS is absolutely critical and awesome and amazing. Unfortunately, the reality behind it is that it's still an incredibly young movement. Of the 18 or 19 proposals that CommonJS has discussed on their listservs, they've only agreed on 2 of them. So there's a whole bunch of these engines like Node.js and stuff that have gone out and said, well, we're going to do the best that we can to implement some stuff. But you might think about this kind of like the team. I'm sure there's somebody at Mozilla right now working on Firefox 4.5 with HTML6 and JavaScript 8, and stuff like that. And they're on the bleeding edge of that stuff. They're just figuring out how some of that stuff should work, and they're doing their best to adhere to some standards, but there are no standards to adhere to yet. That's really the state of CommonJS. It's very... So, being like any good programmer, I decided, well, I see all those others, but they have pluses and minuses, and to some extent they're further down the road of buying into one particular proposal or another. So I decided to write my own server-side JavaScript environment. This is by no means an attempt to unseat Node.js or Narwhal or any of those others. They are light years ahead of anything that I've done. But I did have a significant number of conversations with one of the guys from Narwhal, and tried to adhere as much as I could to some very basic server-side things. Because I only had a particular task that I wanted to solve, which was to demonstrate some stuff, the views that we'll get into in a moment, I didn't really go down all the road of all these other APIs. So this is not a fully functional thing, but it does support your file I/O, your system I/O, and process execution. So the very basic things it does support. And to the extent possible, it supports it in the way that the CommonJS standards are trying to do. It's wrapped around V8, so if you like V8, you can download it. If you don't, find something else. It's a single executable file, so it's a single C++ file. It's very small, like a couple hundred lines of code. It compiles into a single executable. And then the rest of the logic is just JavaScript. So there's modules that it loads to create an environment, a host environment for your server-side JavaScript to run. So CVC plus JavaScript, and I mean JavaScript on the server as well as the browser, really puts the power of that UI architecture back in the hands of the front-end engineers. Imagine having a JavaScript environment where you can simply write your favorite JavaScript code, drop it into a file, and ask the server to execute it, and execute it orders of magnitude faster than it's executing